The picture frame fell to the floor, glass shattering. It used to hold me and David, smiling so wide back when everything was still good. I hadn't even meant to knock it over, but now it was broken, just like our marriage. Remember those Tuesday mornings? Soup kitchen duty. Everyone thought it was so sweet, the nice lady with the happy family, setting a good example. Even I convinced myself it was a perfect life. Well, it wasn't. Things started to shift when Bailey came into the picture. Annie's best friend, always buzzing around our house. Nice kid, but I swear she was there even when Annie wasn't. Started sitting close to David on the couch, laughing at his jokes in that high-pitched curly way. He liked it, started paying attention to her more than me. I tried brushing it off. He's just being friendly, I told myself. He was a good man, good dad. But then, one night I saw them on the couch, almost cuddling. A chill ran down my spine, something deep inside me turning to ice. Annie was the one I went to. She gets me more than my other daughters. Had to talk to someone, and couldn't spill my worries about their dad just like that. I asked her about David and Bailey, trying to keep it casual. Her eyes got real big. No way, Mom, she said, Bailey's way into older guys. She told me about this thing Bailey tried to pull with her friend's dad. Said Bailey would get him alone, saying things about his wife, trying to make a move on him. I felt sick to my stomach. A pit opened up inside me. All those nights I was out volunteering or at my book club, they were in the living room, getting closer. I knew a predator when I saw one, and the worst part was, I let her right into our home. My home, my family, and it was all starting to crumble. Hands shaking. I grabbed his phone from the nightstand. It felt dangerous, like it could burn me, but I couldn't let it go. We'd always trusted each other completely, never checked phones or emails. 34 years of privacy is respect, my own words echoing in my head like some stupid joke. But with Bailey around, trust felt like a lie, my world tilting off its axis. My finger pressed the messages icon. My heart was a drumbeat in my ears, yelling at me to stop, that ignorance might be better than the truth. But a voice, a sharp, cold one I'd never heard before, said the not knowing would eat me alive. I read it, the first text, and everything went cold. Can't wait to do it again next weekend. That was David's text, the little winky face next to it a slap in the face. Then Bailey's reply. I can't wait till you're out of that place and we can do it every day. I dropped the phone like it had turned into a snake. Out of that place. Their code word for me, their way of dismissing our home. My mind raced. All those tricks David took, his church retreats, golfing weekends. How many times have they been together while I was off volunteering, caring about everyone else except myself? A wave of nausea swept over me. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a woman with tired lines around her eyes and a pathetically hopeful smile. The idiot who believed in true love and happy endings. I'd been played for a fool. No wonder Bailey simpered around so much, or why David looked at her the way he used to look at me. I was their joke, the clueless wife blind to their games. But I had Annie, my sweet Annie, downstairs watching mindless TV and trusting her dad. I couldn't let her see me crumble. Plastering a smile on my face felt like putting on armor. I walked downstairs and sat next to her on the couch, asking about school, her friends, her life. It was the hardest performance I'd ever given, but for her, I could do anything. Sleep was impossible. The darkness turned into a screen playing back scenes, David smiling at Bailey, their whispers I'd always dismissed as innocent teasing. I wasn't an idiot, I knew things, but knowing in your gut is different from facing it head on. The next morning felt like a bad dream, but the sick pit in my stomach was all too real. My mind raced. Did I confront him? What did I even say? How could I throw away 34 years on a hunch? But what kind of fool ignores the obvious and smiles for the cameras? The thought of talking to my friends made me cringe. What a humiliating thing to admit, your husband, the respected guy everyone admires, is chasing after a teenager. But I couldn't face this alone. Aunt Carol was the only person I could think of. You get to a point where you want the wisdom of an elder, someone who's seen it all. I went to her house on the pretense of dropping off some books and just let some of it out. I told her about feeling off, about how close David and Bailey had become. She listened intently, her eyes narrowing. Men don't just change, dear, she said. There's usually a reason. Her words scared me, but they also steeled me. I became a detective in my own life. I check his phone while he showered, scan his computer while pretending to tidy. Anything for a clue, a sliver of proof. It was pathetic, and I hated myself for it, but stopping wasn't an option. Each day was a nightmare of pretending. Smiling for Annie at breakfast, then scrambling for more evidence as soon as she left for school. The weight of the secret was crushing me, but what terrified me more was not knowing the full truth. The confrontation was coming like a freight train. I couldn't stop it, but I could prepare. I wouldn't just lay out the texts and ask for an explanation. I needed concrete proof, the kind that left him no room to lie his way out. Every piece of evidence I found was like a brick, building my determination. And the sicker it all got, the stronger a voice deep inside me started whispering, "You will survive this. You can survive anything." The morning David had a golf trip, I sat at the kitchen table, watching birds at the feeder instead of tackling the usual chores. A voice in my head told me to get up, to follow him, but fear froze me. What if I was right, and then what? Later, after he'd kissed me goodbye, I forced myself to walk to the garage. There, in a dusty corner, were his golf clubs. My heart hammered against my ribs. Golf had been his passion until Bailey. A surge of anger shoved back the fear. I wasn't giving up my home without a fight. I changed out of my mom jeans, pulled on something a little nicer, fixed my hair. Then, I drove across town to Bailey's house. Her mom was one of those icy types, all put together and judgy. I'd always avoided her, assuming our lives had nothing in common. How sadly wrong I'd been. Playing the concerned parent was surprisingly easy. I complained about how distracted Bailey had been at school lately, mentioning I'd noticed her and David getting along so well. Mrs. Perfect's smile faltered, and finally, the mask cracked a bit. "Bailey has a hard time fitting in," she said stiffly. "Older men have always been easier for her, more understanding." I almost gasped. Were we talking about the same girl? This wasn't just a crush, it ran deeper. Suddenly, Bailey burst through the front door, all flushed and happy. The look she shot me was pure hatred. If she wasn't in high school, I'd have sworn she was a predator sizing up her prey, which she kind of was. On the drive home, a wave of revulsion washed over me. David was the fool here, but Bailey, she wasn't some lovesick teen playing a game. She was calculating, cold. Every sweet smile she'd thrown my way, every compliment about my home, they were weapons, not gestures of friendship. I felt pity for her, weirdly. What kind of life makes a girl act like that? But pity wouldn't save my marriage. It was war now, and if Bailey wanted to dance, well, she was in for quite the surprise. This middle-aged mom still had a few tricks up her sleeve. Annie came home from school beaming. "Jordan asked me out," she bubbled. "On a real date, can you even believe it?" That bright smile was my whole world. The reason I'd endured, sacrificed, built this comfortable life. Now, I was about to shatter it. I made her sit down. Taking a deep breath, I said, "Honey, I need to tell you some things about Bailey." Her face crumpled in confusion, the happy teenager vanishing. Telling her was the hardest thing I'd ever done. I couldn't sugarcoat it. David. Texts. Bailey the predator, not her sweet friend. As the words poured out, so did her tears. They weren't tears of heartbreak, but of fury and shame. She hugged me, and he sobbed. She cried on my shoulder. How could she do this to us? The pain in her voice was a knife in my heart. I tried to protect her, and I'd failed. Bailey's poison had already seeped into our lives. Word traveled fast at her school. I overheard whispers in the grocery store, saw the pitying looks from neighbors. Annie started staying in her room more, her usual spark dimmed. Friends she'd known forever pulled away, afraid to get caught in the crossfire. One morning, I saw ugly word spray painted across our garage door. Annie was upstairs, but the look she gave me when she came down said it all. Another broken piece of our perfect world. Rage built inside me. I'd already lost so much, but I wouldn't lose my daughter too. That night, I sat with Annie while she scrolled through cruel messages on her phone. You don't deserve any of this, I told her, my voice shaking. It's okay to be angry, but they're wrong. You're strong and kind. Annie finally looked up, tears and anger swirling in her eyes. I'm going to confront her, she declared. I tried to talk her down, but in that moment, I saw myself reflected in her spirit. The confrontation was brutal. I didn't stop Annie, she needed the release. They stood on Bailey's porch, Annie screaming truths, Bailey spewing excuses and lies. But by the end, their friendship lay in tatters, and somehow, a weight lifted off both our shoulders. Bailey's power was broken. I hadn't been able to shield Annie from the world's cruelty, but I could help her face it head on. That night he came home late, reeking of cheap cologne and desperation. I didn't bother making small talk. I went straight for the attack. Get your things, I said, my voice shaking but steady. I know. He went pale. Know what? He stammered, a pathetic act that made my stomach churn. Your little girlfriend. The message is that you think I'm an idiot, I spat the words out. For a moment, he just stared, shock giving way to anger. Then, he started with the excuses. It was a fling, it meant nothing, he was confused. The usual trash men spew to justify betraying the women who love them. It was almost predictable, yet somehow he still managed to gut me. Confused? I practically screamed. For 34 years you weren't confused. My whole body was trembling. Every happy memory we'd shared suddenly coated in disgust. He tried the, I need space, routine, and I almost laughed. I told him he could have all the space he wanted, as far away from me as possible. The next few days were a blur of tears and rage. My older daughters called, worried about my vague explanations, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth. How does a mother admit her picture-perfect marriage was a sham? My mind screamed for answers, for advice. I found myself dialing Aunt Carol's number again, the only person I felt I could confide in to some extent. He needs to leave, she said when I poured out my heart. And, dear, you need to see a lawyer. Protect yourself. Her words sliced through my emotional fog. She was right. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was in a battle now, and I needed to fight for what was rightfully mine. Talking to her, making a plan, snapped something into focus. A shift happened. I was still broken, but a new feeling sparked deep inside, determination. David never thought I'd stand up to him. Turns out, he didn't know me as well as he thought he did. The worst part, well, besides the soul-crushing betrayal part, was telling my older girls. Sarah, with her baby and perfect little house. Emily, who called Dad her rock. How do you shatter their world too? But keeping up the lie would be worse, eating me from the inside out. One Sunday afternoon, I sat them down on the worn couch where they'd learned to ride imaginary horses as kids. My voice shook as I started to talk. I told them about Bailey, the messages, all of it. Sarah burst into tears, and some ugly piece of me was glad it wasn't just me suffering. But Emily, she was stone-faced. Cold. Why are you saying this now? She snapped. Trying to ruin everything? The words twisted the knife in my heart. I'm not trying to hurt you, I cried. He's the one who ruined things. Dad would never, she said, voice icy. You're just blaming him because you're jealous. Jealous of that child? I wanted to scream that I'd been a good wife, that I'd made their lives possible. Instead, my voice died in my throat. They left without another word, and I crumbled into the sofa cushions, my sobs echoing in the empty house. Over the next few weeks, my perfect family disintegrated. Sarah stood by me, awkwardly at first, then with a fierce anger towards David. But Emily, she wouldn't even take my calls. I heard rumors from well-meaning friends Emily was painting me as the crazy wife making things up. Shame washed over me like a tidal wave. David lost his job, too much distraction, they said. Serves him right. But it hurt the girls, even Emily, and some twisted part of her blamed me for that, too. Annie was my rock. Where I faltered, she grew strong. She even reached out to Sarah, rekindling their sister bond. They went to a therapist together, talking about things I never would have been able to. In her own hurt way, Annie was becoming the woman I could never quite be. People I'd known for years avoided my gaze at the supermarket. The whispers, they got louder. I'd gone from the perfect wife to a figure of pity and sometimes disgust. But the worst thing? Sometimes I looked in the mirror and agreed with them. Wasn't it my fault for not noticing, not being enough? The house felt haunted now. Empty rooms echoed with memories, mocking the promises whispered inside them. I needed to leave, go somewhere quiet, just to breathe. Annie suggested a weekend at Aunt Carol's cabin. It was a relic of my childhood, dusty furniture, the faint smell of wood smoke, and a porch swing overlooking the lake. Walking the forest trails, something in me loosened. It wasn't peace, exactly, more like a raw acceptance. Bad things happen to good people. It didn't make sense, but there it was. Aunt Carol was surprisingly wise. She didn't offer pity or platitudes. Instead, she showed me how to tend her beehives, the buzzing almost hypnotic. Those girls, they'll come back to you one day, she said. Just focus on building your own sweetness now. Back home, I tried. I found a group for women my age dealing with loss, not just death, but loss of dreams, of identity. It turns out there were a lot of us hiding in plain sight. Talking to them, their stories mirrored my own: betrayal, heartbreak, the quiet desperation. But also, laughter, and even moments of joy stolen back from the wreckage. David wanted to talk things through, couples counseling. Maybe once I would have clung to that hope. Now, hope felt dangerous, fragile. I wasn't sure anything was left to rebuild. Rumors about Bailey trickled in, satisfying and ugly at the same time. I heard about another boy, another broken family. She was poison, moving on to the next victim. A part of me pitied her. A far bigger part, however, wanted karma to finally catch up with her. The lawyer's office was all cold steel and fancy suits. I signed papers without really reading them, the words swimming on the page. David would get his things, I'd get the house, and we'd both get a clean break. Can you forgive him? The lawyer asked. I hesitated. No, I finally said, not ever. Maybe I'll forgive myself one day for not seeing the truth, but him? Never. There was strength in admitting it. I was giving up on the fairy tale, but not on my right to anger, to bitterness, to a future where those emotions didn't control me, but could coexist with whatever came next. Time stopped making sense. Some days stretched into endless deserts. Others were blinks in the night. My girls came less often. There was an understanding. I couldn't fix this pain for them, only they could do that for themselves. One morning, I woke up and the anger was a dull throb instead of a raging fire. Instead of throwing things or sobbing into a pillow, I walked to the attic, dusty sunlight slanting through the window. In old boxes, I found pieces of myself I'd forgotten. There was the half-finished watercolor I'd started as a teen, abandoned when the boys came along. A stack of poetry journals with cringeworthy teenage musings and surprising flashes of insight. A brochure about teaching yoga. Something I'd vaguely thought about once, but never pursued. Something flipped inside me. Not a surge of optimism, more like a grim determination. I wouldn't just survive. I was damn well going to rebuild. Sarah helped me clear space in the garage. I bought canvases, bright paints that made my fingers itch. My first few paintings were messes, swirling colors and barely formed shapes. But it felt more exhilarating than anything I'd done in years. Yoga seemed like a bigger step. The studio felt intimidating, full of young, lithe bodies. The first few classes were agony, my body protesting every pose. But as weeks passed, I found something in the stillness, in connecting breath and movement. It wasn't peace, but a kind of groundedness. The girls drifted back, one by one. Emily was the last, her apology stilted but real. We didn't talk about David much. Instead, we took walks, baked cookies, awkwardly built something new. People often talk about closure, like it's a finish line. There isn't one. Some nights, a whiff of cologne in the supermarket sends me spiraling. Some days, I imagine alternate lives, the happy wife, the grandmother surrounded by giggling kids. Most days, though, I just focus on the next step. Painting, breathing,